But the first role of yours that I wanted to touch upon is from the sequel to The Mask of Zorro.
It was great. It was a wonderful role. And because it had, as you say, a mixture of...
His name is Eno Cordova, and he helps our hero Cal Kestis along his journey.
The majority of it is done live.
Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. Today I'm absolutely honored to present Mr. Anthony Amendola. His name is pretty much synonymous with science fiction and American television. He starred in so many of the biggest movies and television shows as well as games. For instance, Rebel Moon, World of Warcraft, Stargate SG-1, Jedi Fallen Order games, Mask of Zorro, Dexter, Star Trek, X-Files, Seinfeld. His huge career also covers 12 years worth of stage experience as well, in theatrical productions such as Othello, American Buffalo, The Merchants of Venice, and many more. Mr. Anthony, how are you doing? What's going on?
I'm doing fine. But don't call me Mr. Anthony. It makes me feel old. Call me Tony, please.
I absolutely will. It has to be my old school Soviet era Russian upbringing. Always, pay homage and respect. But as we've before we started rolling on screen, guys, I've been very frank with Tony that I'm a little bit starstruck here. I'm a huge admirer of your talent, as I'm sure many fans around the world of these big franchises that you've participated and contributed in a great deal too. And pretty much, it's safe to say that there isn't a single genre that your body of work has not covered. Do you have any personal favorite genre to work in?
You sort of hit it on the money. I love the variety, not only in genre, but in media. For instance, do some television, then you do, let's do some just VO, now let's do a video game, let's do a film, let's do some theater. I love the, because they're all, we can say they're all, in the same family, but they're cousins. What your experience in doing a play, because it's continuous, you play the whole symphony, is very, very different than doing a television thing where you're doing, the first act of the play on a Monday, the fourth act on a Tuesday, the second act on a Wednesday. So it's a different thing. I enjoy them all. I enjoy particularly the variety, which keeps me on my toes, so I don't get too set in my ways. Although sort of the joke is, he's a television. I show you a television actor.
Yeah, the mind is a flexible thing, and I imagine as much, it keeps you flexible and shifting back and forth and, intermingling with these different styles. And for an actor who tells someone else's story, whether you're working with a TV script or a play, what is the most important thing that you personally want to convey?
Well, you sort of hit it on the money, you want to be an ally to the director in the telling of his or her story. And particularly in the theater, you want to respect the play. You don't want to over-respect the play because, there's something that people say, particularly in the theater. If you go to see Hamlet, that script exists. It's stable. It might be cut, but it exists. You can read it at home. Why go to the theater? You're going to the theater to hear the subtext of what the actor is doing and what the director is doing, and what the designers are doing with this story. So it's very important to know where you're working and also, frankly, your place in the food chain.
You sort of translate a story or a rich known character that has been carried through generations, of oral traditions and also literature. And you're sort of passing on that information, that character through your own prison, right?
Yeah. Yeah. For instance, I saw a production of Hamlet recently. And Hamlet is the experience of youth. Now, how the Hamlet of my generation in the 60s, in the early 70s, 70s, is very different than the Hamlet of 2020, how he or she would express it. And I say she because we see many women playing Hamlet now.
Right.
Because it's universal, but it's also attuned to the youth. On the opposite side of that coin is Lear. Lear is the experience of age and foolishness, and eventually finding wisdom. So you just have to know the story you're trying to tell. Ideally, you'll have good directors who can help you with that. Not always. Not always. Sometimes, and it's different. Theater is much more communal. What I mean by that is, although film is a huge group of people, it's very rapid. It's very quick. You go in, oh, this is my wife of 30 years. Well, guess what? I met her 15 minutes ago. We've barely exchanged anything. But you have the script, you've imagined, you're an actor. Part of your tools say, if I love this woman, if I enjoy working with this woman, I'm ahead of the game. Isn't that wonderful? I may know her from the past. I may respect her work, but often you've never met her. So you have to see what the chemistry is. And if the chemistry is not good, you still have to be able to do your job.
As a professional,
right? You get into substitution. This woman is not this woman. This woman is the one that got away or something from me. You know what I mean? You play games with yourselves in a kind of way.
Yeah.
And in the theater, you get to talk about it a lot. You get to rehearse 3 or 4 weeks in the same room with everyone. For instance, I've done, oh God, I can't believe I'm spacing. Yes, I've done 3 movies with Ray Liotta. I never met him. Unfortunately, I won't be able to meet him now. He's passed.
Yeah.
But I did 3 movies with him. We were in, and some people think that, oh, you're all together like in the theater. You're not.
Not necessarily. Right.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, sometimes what's ironic is often you don't get the full cast list. Like, the father to my godchildren, we were watching television. We were in the same episode. We didn't even know.
That's curious.
It's much more. It can be a little bit more impersonal. It's such a big. Can be, not always. Right. Whereas in theater, you're spending time together.
And when you are in the stage of preparing for your roles, how much of your individuality as a person translates into the character?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. That's all you have is yourself.
Makes sense,
it's all you have. So it's got to come through you, through your experience. Probably the best way to say it is it's a marriage between you and the material, and what is created is a shared sort of thing. Because just by saying the lines on some level, with my voice, with my body, with my face, has will have a different feel than if, say, some Norwegian guy who, or something automatically. So it is always both. You want to be true to the character, but you want to be true to yourself as as an actor too. You don't want to feel like you're being a cookie cutter and trying to fit into this thing. You want a shared space. You want it to breathe. Yeah.
And also we as film audience, I think it's very, even for an untrained eye, it's pretty easy to pick up when an actor is a great or not, regardless of their skill level or talent, when they're faking it or not, when something is projected from, it's hard to describe, from here versus an actor consciously trying to, modulate his voice or overact or underact. It's always a very stark difference. And audience, as untrained as we are, we still pick up on that.
You do. That you've hit on a couple of things that are difficult. One of which you're called out for lying on screen much more, even more so than in the theater, because in the theater, depending on the size of the space, you have to be truthful at 100 feet. You're not being truthful like you are with a camera. Many actors talk about what the camera records are not lines, they record thoughts. In the theater, it's very interesting. Generally, the most powerful person is the biggest presence and the biggest voice. And if you notice in film, generally, it's the person who they allow to talk the quietest. They allow them to, and then you as an audience lean in. It's a very interesting sort of issue So I don't know. It's a mystery, and it's always a push and pull. You know, what you're trying to do is meet the technical demands of film, television, whatever it is, video games, if it's motion capture, and your reality, and you're trying to pull both so that they throb, so that there's vibration. That's what you're trying to do.
I love how you
and
put
that's
it.
What, yeah, that's
it makes
that's
a lot
where
of
it
sense.
is. You can't do it. I mean, you can't do it all the time, and that leads us to another thing. You know, people will say, "Oh, I don't think of myself as an artist. I think of myself as an artisan who occasionally can create art." But particularly in the theater, art is created on a given night between the audience and the actor. Something special happens. It's always entertainment. It always has to be good. It always has to be developed and polished. But on certain nights, there's just something in the air
it's
that
like
you
a rock
breathe
concert.
together.
You go to a special
together.
performance. You know, me and my younger brother, we got to see Black Sabbath here in New York City in Madison Square Garden. And it was this magical moment where Tony Iommi was performing improv for 11 minutes long. When new cameras had to be there, it was that magical moment that only happens once in a generation. And it was my father's band who introduced me to it. And he's, oh my God, you didn't take me to this concert.
You know, that's the beauty, and that's on some level is the beauty of acting. I was at a play recently where a woman, it was a comedy too, and she had a knife and a spatula, and she was being very threatening. Well, all of a sudden, sort of the blade came off of the knife. Luckily, no one was injured, but you had to deal with that. And because it was a comedy, her sort of shock and her take created a humorous moment, and the thing like, oh, well, that could have been a lot worse. I'm sorry, It's very, very interesting. And some of the great directors, I don't know if you've read about the directors in the 40s, and they drive actors crazy with take after take after take of a scene. And finally, one actor said I was William Wilder, the director. The actor says, "What the hell do you want from me?" And he says, "Well, yeah, I'm waiting for your next mistake." What he means by that, he's waiting for something organic to happen. Because because it's very hard in theater and in film when all of a sudden you're on your 12th take. And part of the thing is making it organic again for yourself.
And acting is very physical, which not a lot of people realize.
Can be quite physical. It just depends. If you're doing a judge, it's not that physical. On a television show, but it's got its own problems.
And if we're doing another character we'll touch upon in this podcast, it gets pretty physical.
Oh, it can, yes.
Tony, I wanted to started delving into this greater theme that I wanted to do encompassing your career, and not just talk about Star Wars, but in science fiction in general. It's a genre that for decades has been kind of frowned upon. The comic books, the video games, they've been largely neglected by society as something that's, it's just a simple entertainment. It's not serious. It's going to fade away. It's just a fad. And many believe it wouldn't stand the test of time. And yet here we are in 2024. Science fiction is a major vehicle for storytelling across all media, and it's more popular than ever. And the question I had for you is, what is so special about science fiction to you personally, and how are fictional characters similar or different to nonfiction?
That's a great question. It has. In fact, you could say we're in the heyday of it right now. I mean, we're in, people talk about, what do they say? Well, they talk about the heyday of television. So many things. We're in that with sci-fi and fantasy right now. Intellectual property. There's a lot of reasons for it. One, I can tell you the most monetary reason for it is they spend enormous amounts of money on these films, and they're hedging a bet. So you have an original idea. No one knows from whatever the character is, Mr. Dream. That's the character. No one's ever heard of Mr. Dream. But if there's an intellectual property that they have heard about, they feel like, oh, okay, we'll do that because in the 50s, they saw, or in the 60s, that was around. And maybe we can, so they're hedging their bets. And that's and they're looking towards intellectual properties that are in the Marvel comic books and other things, And you knew that was happening when, of course, Disney bought Marvel and Star Wars, and you knew you were in a whole different age, because you're right. There was a time where it was sort of looked down upon in a kind of way. I'm not completely, maybe it was thought of as being kid stuff. And yet, if the great creators of that work, everything from Alien to obviously Star Wars and Roddenberry and Brad Wright in Stargate, although it was taken from a movie, you realize it's about so much more.
Yeah.
Because sci-fi this is an old thing. Sci-fi is never about the future. It's always about a current problem. We don't know what our problem is going to be in the future.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Right. If there's a dystopian sort of thing, climate thing that's going on, well, guess what? It comes from right now, because we have great fear about what's going to happen to the climate with global warming, et cetera, and it's projected into a future, a sci-fi future, where guess what? We have to live in another place, so we have to look for a certain kind of mineral to survive here, and it crosses over reality when you consider some of the wealthiest people in the world today are trying to figure out how to get to Mars. Yeah, when I think of them, because I'm thinking to myself, okay, are they actually trying to get to Mars just for the exploration and the technology and the survival and the discovery, the human need to see what's out there? Or are they trying to get there because we need to get the hell off this planet in 50 years, for 30 years? There's so many different things, but sci-fi, and it's also, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, it's inclusive of everyone. I can't tell you.
Right, it's a beautiful interpretation of how the ostracized, the kids which are shunned by society, how you can be welcomed into the family. We can embrace you. You can see yourself, your new potential as a gift.
Yes. The one thing I learned about sci-fi and doing some conventions, it's the most diverse group of people I ever encountered. And it's generational. It's grandmothers and grandfathers who've introduced their kids to franchises, who now have kids and are watching the same, so it's huge. And also, it's very diverse, soldiers, heavy military presence in interest in sci-fi and fantasy and stuff. And yet at the same time, you get sort of the nerd, for lack of a better word, the nerd interest. And then you get it from all directions, and it's rewarding in a kind of way. So.
Yeah. And it also brings to mind, when you watch these wonderful documentaries about the history of comic books like DC, and where all these young children in the 40s were waiting for their fathers to come off war, reading these characters, and parents would brush off it just as cheap comic book entertainment books with pictures in them. And when these kids grew up, they internalized all these stories, and they matured these characters like Superman, Batman, gave them more resonating, layered stories that now everybody can relate to. But the first role of yours that I wanted to touch upon today, because again, we wanted to cover as much as possible in 1 hour, and my personal memorable scene with you that comes to mind is from the sequel to The Mask of Zorro, which was The Legend of Zorro, and you played this character called Padre Quintero, and it's a very amusing, very fun scene where you give a very intense performance, educating a young Joaquin de la Vega, who is Zorro's son, in the term of statehood, and you write it on the desk, and it's an exceptional scene because, first of all, you give a very powerful, tense dialogue. It's very well written, very solid. But then it's diffused with this lighthearted slapstick humor, and you're running around, you're after this kid. It's obviously humorous, but what it also does, your role, as small as it may be on the surface, it describes what this child is like. It gives us something to go on, and past the point where your performance begins and ends, we stick with it. We go there
Yes.
because you described the character in a way that we couldn't without you. My great uncle, who was a Soviet era actor, and he did his last final role here in the United States with Robin Williams, he said,
wow.
everybody, please hurry up and play as many supporting roles as you can. That was his saying. And the
Yes,
question,
yes.
the question I have for you is, can you describe what actor experience it requires to deliver such a performance and make it look natural, but also memorable?
Yeah, that's tough. I will tell you a little story. As you said, I did The Mask of Zorro. That way, it was a wonderful experience. You know, it was 4 months in Mexico, and it was terrific. And afterwards, I went on my merry way, like we all do. And I was working. Stargate popped up immediately, and I was doing some films in Bulgaria.
Mhm.
And I got wind. I had just gotten back from Bulgaria. Every time I worked in Bulgaria, it was winter. Working at night outdoors in winter in Bulgaria. It was a wonderful experience, but boy, it's tough. So I came back and I heard they were doing they were doing a sequel. And I'm thinking, oh God, I wish I could. You don't know what happens to my character, you know.
Right.
So I thought, you know what? The hell with it. I'll write Martin Campbell, the director, a letter. And I wrote him a letter saying, Dear Martin, I hear you doing the sequel, Legend to Mask of Zorro, Legend of Zorro. I just want you to know that I have been working in Bulgaria for the last couple. I've been freezing my butt off, and I need to work someplace warm. If there's anything that you think is suitable, please let me know. Didn't hear anything. A couple of months, and then finally, one day, back then, a script would be delivered to your door. A script was delivered to my door saying, Tony, if you're interested, here. And this is the funny thing. I read it, and there was nothing. My character wasn't developed in it. I mean, there was literally nothing for him. And for 30 seconds, Ben, I thought, well, you know, I can't. And then I thought, are you crazy? Just go. And of course, I said yes. It doesn't make a difference. I go to Mexico. And as soon as I got there, Martin Campbell said, okay, we're rewriting this, this, and this, and you're going to be in these other scenes. And I was down there for 2 months, you know. But getting back to the role, it was great. It was a wonderful role. And because it had, as you say, a mixture of a stern Jesuit, Dominican, you know, meaning the Inquisition sort of demeanor. And a lot of they were teachers, these guys. And then you got this little boy. And
He was wonderful.
It was one of my favorite scenes. It was one that I've ever done. I'll tell you that scene, we shot it for a week.
Really?
A week. My biggest worry in that scene, for me, was not hurting the little boy.
Yeah, right. Obviously.
Because
he's jumping all over the desk. He's doing all this crazy stuff.
He's incredible. For those who haven't seen this, I mean, I recommend you see this film. And it's, you know, and what is the lesson of the scene? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, you know, and I needed to be the antagonist to that, which led me to be very tight, very strict. I went to Catholic school, you know, very intimidating. And I love the other scene. There's you know, I really like the other scene too, where he's on the field trip with the boys, and all of a sudden,
Trying to recall, it's been years. I remember loving part 2. I was worried it's gonna be as good as part 1. It was just as enjoyable, but that was the scene that stood out to me.
No, and the director loved that scene. You know,
Yeah.
The director is very nice to me, and he after we shot that scene, you know, they do a rough cut, they put it together, and he came up to me, he says, "You have to go see the scene. Go to the editor and tell him I said you could see the scene." And I have to say, I was thrilled.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Anyway, but yeah, that was my first studio film, you know, and you know, you can argue studio films, independent films, it's a whole different thing. But when you do a studio film, it's like moving a city. The first time I had seen Mr. Bean, you know, Roland Atkinson, was on a plane, a chartered plane that they had chartered for all these people, you know, 150 people. And it was back when there was just one screen. No one had their individual screen. This is 97. So 97, 98. So, and I will never forget it because the entire plane was laughing at the same time. And now, when you're on a plane, of course, everyone's watching their own entertainment. Yeah. But to this day, I remember And I thought, what are they laughing at? And because I had never seen Mr. Bean until that day. Anyway.
Mhm. Moving on to your theatrical work, I absolutely wanted to touch on that because my father relating to me watching that great uncle of ours who was a Soviet actor, watching, he was primarily known through his stage work and also some secondary and supporting roles in cinema. And my dad always mentioned, he repeated it like mantra. He said, Ben, watching theater and cinema is two different things. And just to preface a little bit, we know that obviously anyone who is well read knows that Othello is a Shakespearean tragedy famous around the world. And many stage and film actors deliver their own treatments of this character. And that it's a timeless story of a Moorish military commander and Venetian beauty Desdemona, and of course, which results in a tragic end. What do your stage performances offer that audience can see in your live action work?
I think it's a different kind of skill. Number one, they can see my entire performance. What do I mean by that? The stage is much more democratic than film and television. If I myself or any actor of my level is doing a scene with blank, fill in a star, actress or actor. When you, the audience, see that scene, 99 times out of 100, that scene is going to be weighed towards the star. Mm-hmm. And they do this by the cutting. Now, in the theater, the audience's eye does the editing. The audience's eye can choose to follow the great star, the person they say, or they could follow the guy in the corner. So they have a choice to make who they choose. So that is number one. It's democratic. So consequently, you get to have the whole experience in one evening. The second reason I think it needs to be cherished is it's an art form. And notice I say an art form. I didn't say I was an artist. That is 2,500 years old on its western side. I'm not even talking in the East, right. In Greek, etc. And the actors has value in that, in the sense there's a lineage. There's a sense that you want to, that actors have been through the same thing, because you forget, in a kind of way, actors are surrogates, particularly in sci-fi. Right. They are the body with which the audience has this experience, female or male. They are, and that came from the priest, back in, the Greek priests. They believed the theater, the theater was created through religious rites. It then was shut down by the church. And then, oddly enough, it was recreated in the same thing by mystery plays, which were in the Middle Ages. So there's something about that continuity. There's something about that is very, very important to actors, and that's why I recommend it. You don't have to do a steady diet of it, because I'll be honest with you. I did about 15 years of theater before coming to LA, and that was perfect for me because I wasn't selling beauty. I wasn't, I didn't make sense as an actor until I was in my 40s. They didn't know quite what to do with me. I was a young guy, but he looks older. But I said, and so I took that time to work to try and do as much Shakespeare and as much of the classics as I possibly could. Because I think that if you challenge yourself with the classics, what is in it for the actor? You can say, oh, the interaction with the audience and this. No, what is in it for the actor beyond that is if you can handle language and great ideas and great emotions of the great playwrights, you can handle anything. It's all a question of modulation after that. Of course, you don't do a performance of Othello on screen as you would in the theater. It's different, in terms of if you think of truth being a vessel, it's a much bigger vessel in the theater than it is on film. As you say, if you did it that way on film, you think, who is this guy? I never played Othello. I played Iago 2 times, which was fascinating to me. 10 years different, one of the great roles, and always interesting because it's a brutal play, that deals with racism and etc. Right. People people, I remember one time I was doing a talk back and women said, I just don't understand why people, act like that in those times. And I said, excuse me. We live in a society where if I encounter another man and I look at him cross-eyed in a shopping center, he is liable to come, or I am liable to go if we're streety and shoot not only me, but everyone who's in front of my house. And you don't understand? You're in denial of your society, is what I'm saying. That this hunger for, and yet I can't play that as an actor and that's Tony's evaluation of how crazy this world is. But my need is to understand why Iago does it. And that's human too. It's a slight. He's been overlooked. A guy in his 40s who his job, which he deserves, who he's done everything to create, to help build the company, let's put it in business terms, is given to a new MBA graduate. Mm-hmm. How does he feel? I mean, don't you think he wants to figure out a way of just, it's a human impulse. And in theater, we get to experience, we get to act on those impulses. We get to understand. Obviously, in life, it wouldn't be a wise thing to burn down your company, because you'd lose your job.
Yeah. I always,
in addition.
I always consider that great storytelling is timeless, and not to make snobs of Russian movie watchers, but because we have such a rich culture of theater and then also film, like Eisenstein and more modern, filmmakers, is we instantly recognize and make a distinction between a performance in movie that we see and say, this actor is probably stage trained. Oh, this one is probably not, because the way that he delivers lines. We instantly recognize that.
And you have such a great tradition of writers. I've been fortunate enough. I've done 3 of the major Chekhovs. I've done Vanya, I've done 3 Sisters, and I've done Cherry Orchard. Mm-hmm. I was supposed to be in Seagull, but I got Continuum, so I couldn't do it. But it's such a rich thing. And you know what I'm watching now? Have you been watching it? A Gentleman in Moscow. You know what that is?
No.
It's a series that's on Showtime right now. It's taken from Amor Towles' novel with overlapping the sci-fi, Ewan McGregor.
Okay.
And he plays a white Russian who, right after the revolution, comes back. He doesn't quite understand why, but he comes back to Russia because his estate, his sister, his mother, and he ends up being caught. And he's going to be, of course, executed or put in a gulag of some sorts. And then he doesn't know who, but one official read a piece of poetry that he wrote as a young man. And for that reason, he's spared. But he's spared on the proviso that for the rest of his life, he has to live in the Metropole Hotel. Mm. He cannot leave the hotel. And, it's one of the famous hotels in Moscow.
Right. That's an interesting premise.
It's a wonderful series if you're interested.
I'm already putting like a mental note. I know I'm downloading this for my father or like streaming it for him. He'll be watching.
And it's a wonderful novel. It originally was a novel. It's a great novel. Mm-hmm. Amor Towles.
I'll definitely remember this. Mr. Tony, I'm sorry. Stuttering a little bit here. I'd like to move on and talk to something that is near and dear to my heart. And guys, I will seriously now. You saw me. I'm not acting here. I was geeking out, nerding that Tony finally has joined me. It's honestly a life dream coming true. One of my favorite actors, and I'm interviewing him. I will try not to oversell my personal impression on this game. And we're talking about obviously Star Wars, the Jedi Fallen Order, specifically the first one. I didn't get the chance to get too far in the second game. I just started playing it because work, job, time, and everything. But I did go through the first one, and it was a huge relief, not just for me, but for many Star Wars fans, because at the time, the Electronic Arts company, they weren't delivering to what Star Wars fans were hungry for so long. And it means the world to fans. It's the universe they've been living for all their lives. And when the game came out, I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying it swept the fandom. Like, everybody was enthralled with it. Old school fans, modern fans, younger, older audience. And the character that you portray in it, he's this long guy, Jedi master from the past who only appears via holo recordings, right? These projections. Right. His name is Eno Cordova. And he helps our hero, Cal Kestis, along his journey. And he's in search of this lost civilization of Zepho people, almost like Indiana Jones sort of adventure there. But he's at the same time this familiar, the great mentor, the Yoda, the samurai who puts the young mind on the right path. And although you appear only via hologram, I personally felt that your particular role was key to the story's success. And there's this lesson of, patience, following your true calling, and help shape this young hero into confident Jedi warrior that he will become, the fight the good. Can you talk about your first introduction to Star Wars in general? And, how did this casting happen? Did you hear about this particular character, or was it something that just came along?
Well, I saw Star Wars in the theater, the first one, 1977. And even at that time, I would go to the major Star Wars, Alien, the ones that were truly cultural events. And that always stuck with me. It always was something that stuck. And I thought, oh, God, how fabulous. And then for a number of years, when I was doing theater, I was up in San Francisco and Berkeley. And that's where Lucas Ranch is, of course.
Right.
So I dabbled a little bit. I did some coaching on one of the shows, but I was doing primarily theater. So when the opportunity to audition for Star Wars happened, and you don't even know what it is. You see, the thing they're so secretive. They don't even tell you what it is. So
Believe me, I know.
Yeah, on some level, that's good because you don't freak out. You don't go, oh my God, this is so important. I love this thing so much. And you just go in and it's a simple scene. And the scene I auditioned with was the scene where I'm going to turn him, basically going to turn R2-D2 off, essentially. And it made me think the job was to make that as human as I kept thinking of Tom Hanks in God, what's the movie where he gets stranded, or he's on the island. I forget the name of the movie. Outcast, and Wilson.
He's a character.
And Wilson is And I remember I did the audition, and on my way out, we were talking about it, and then I said, "Oh yeah," I said, "This scene reminds me," because I didn't know who I was talking to. I didn't know it was. I said, the scene is so well written and so moving in a kind of way, because as you say, he's doing this for the greater good, but he's harming his only company, perhaps for the last 20 years. He's, someone was always on his shoulder, at his heel. They were, and it was quite beautiful. About 8 years ago or so, I decided to get a voice agent because I thought, you know what? Yeah, there was a time when I came to LA where you didn't do commercials and you either did film or television or just did television. There was no crossover. Well, not everything is crossed over. You can't watch a commercial today without seeing a star on it. Right. It's the Wild West. So I thought, okay, I'm going to protect myself in a kind of way. I'm open, I'm interested. I don't know what the work will be like, but I am, again, an artisan is what I think of myself. I will use the tools I have to help this, whatever the project is. And so I managed to get one. My first job, my first audition, World of Warcraft. That was the first audition, literally the first, and I got it. And that is it, that was a job that keeps on giving. And, and then I did a video game. I think the first video game I did was,
I did look up the most memorable ones.
Call of Duty.
Call of Duty was the first one.
Yeah. It was a smallish thing, but it got my feet wet, and I learned what that world was like. For instance, I'm studying my lines. I'm running, and I'm just running them. And we go to roll to shoot, and I go to put my script away. And the director and the cameraman said, "Oh, no, you don't. You can keep it on the table. We can't see it." I said, "What?" Because unless something is dotted, marked, you can't, And so by the time when Star Wars happened, and I realized, oh my God, it's Star Wars. All I could think of, and I just posted this on. I posted a photo of Eno Cordova on what I still call Twitter, X, and I wrote from Jaffa to Jedi. And that was the other thing, because, oh my God, because the roles are the same, mentors, you know, guidance and all those things. But the organs from which they operate are very different, because you want, Cordova has a hunger for knowledge. So he's heavily in here. It's heavy.
He's a young mind.
He's a hungry mind. And Braytak is an open heart. It's an open, that's why he's impulsive occasionally. He doesn't lead from his brain. He's very smart, but the most important organ in his body in Braytak is his heart. Goes back to the notion of that's where your courage was at one point, was in your heart. But the interesting question you have to ask about Cordova is, he's not a warrior Jedi Knight.
He's Yoda.
Yes, he's an archaeologist. He's this guy, and so that was fabulous. I can't tell you. And the people were so nice. And Cameron, couldn't have been nicer, easier to work with. Everyone in the thing, and it's you feel like a kid, because you see that whole world, right? Really, what exists are guys in skin tight, like leotards and suit, with all these funny dots on them, in sets that are made of cardboard or plywood, and there's nothing. So you really feel like make believe.
Yeah.
And it really is powerful. And I'm so happy I did it. For instance, just technically, we had a strike here for 5.5 months.
Right.
I of course couldn't work in film and television, but guess what? I was doing other things, other games and stuff. So it was a lifesaver. And I'm not talking just financially. An actor needs to act. So I could honor my union and not do the other work. And yet at the same time, I was lucky enough to have an outlet for my hunger to work.
One last quick question on Jedi Fallen Order. We got about 12 minutes to run on it. I can't let you go without touching on the SG-1. But the last question I had on the Star Wars Jedi Order, I'm the kid who grew up with Star Wars in the 80s in Soviet Union, watching on the VHS tapes. But when I was playing the game, thanks to these modern, visual fidelity and graphics on the game, the moment that I saw your howl, I swear I knew who you were. That's Anthony Amendola. And I'm the type of person for whom Star Wars is not about lightsabers or ships exploding or cool-looking outfits. It's about the journey. It's about the heart and soul of it. And when you were performing it, the question that I had for you, they captured the likeness of the actor. But I wanted to ask you, was there any sort of physicality involved? Like, for example, when Mark Hamill, known for his voice work, he's in the booth there and he's articulating himself. How was your in-booth performance like? What did you have to bring to this character?
Yeah, well, the majority of it was not done. It was done live. In other words, they were recording when I was acting.
It was you.
So it was me completely.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But there was some VO, and it just depends on the character. I like to gesticulate. It depends on what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
If I find that I'm not feeling, I'll try to get it into my body. If I find if it's only my voice, but it's always. I had a teacher who says, you give an actor a toolbox, and you give them, because there are problems that come up when you're working on a role, but you don't open the toolbox unless you need it. So if you can walk in and fix, if there's no problem, don't mess with it.
That makes sense.
So, and I didn't feel a great, I felt pretty connected to the story. So it was easy. There have been a couple of things that I've done in the past that I will go nameless, that I haven't felt connected to. And that's where, like I said earlier, you say, okay, Tony, find a substitution. The thing is, I used to have an acting teacher who said, Juliet should be able to play the Romeo love scene with a chair. She should be able to create, with her imagination, Romeo in an inanimate object. And we're asked to do it all the time when we audition. So, there's no Romeo when you're auditioning, No, I'm very, very happy that I entered this world, and I've had nothing but pleasant experiences. The hardest thing is I like to wear a goatee, and I had to shave. And sometimes that gets into problems with other work. So I had a goatee made so I can put it back on. And right now I'm growing it back because I was doing something, we're all under non-disclosure agreement, so I can't say. So I'm growing a full beard, and I was lucky enough to, while in the process of growing a full beard, I got a job that the growth, it was much shorter. It was about 10 days ago. Was perfect for the role because it was a rancher. It was a Western rancher sort of guy, and I can't say anything more about it. But you just try to adapt and use your tools when necessary. Yeah.
Guys, so yeah, for a Star Wars dedicated channel and Jedi's, all that cool stuff, we're gonna cheat a little bit, and I'm going to permit myself, in presence of an actor who I admire with all my heart, we're gonna go a different direction. Stargate SG-1. First, it completely captured world's imagination in 1994, obviously with the original film, and then when Stargate SG-1 came out, it made a huge fan out of me with your work and obviously with the ensemble of all wonderful actors in it. And in it, you play a character called Braddock of Chulak. He's a Jaffa master and a personal mentor to father figure of teal'c, portrayed by another fan favorite, Christopher Judge.
Oh, gee.
And in that story, once again, you are this Gandalf. You are the master at arms, the man at arms, and a Jedi warrior in a way, like you mentioned earlier, who learns both his faith and martial skill to lead the Free Jaffa People nation. And both in the original film and SG-1 setting, heavily lean on the Egyptian culture and themes, right? On its history and its art. And you see it in the Jaffa people who seem to be inspired by that same source. Yeah. And what I wanted to ask you is, when you first read the script, what was your impression of this character? And what did you want to add to him that wasn't in the original script?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Let me clarify one thing before I say. The great difference between Star Trek and Stargate is contemporary. It's contemporary sci-fi. It takes place right now, which was brilliant, and very, very interesting. And I think that's one of the reasons why it sort of resonated in a different way. And it was never in competition with Star Trek, et cetera. Although there were, we had Stargate SG-1, Atlantis, Universe, and several movies. But the Egyptian thing, what did I bring to it? As I said earlier, I had just finished, literally had just gotten back from doing Mask of Zorro. Mm-hmm. I was back, a week, 10 weeks, and I got this audition. I remember it vividly because it was over. I prepared it over the 4th of July weekend. So while I was barbecuing, in between barbecuing, doing stuff, I'd be trying to work on this script because the audition, And the reason why is I wanted to go to Vancouver. It's shot in Vancouver. And my wife and I had a wonderful vacation in the Canadian Rockies, and we passed through Vancouver, and we fell in love with it. So I wanted to go to Vancouver. And that was foremost. I know it sounds crazy in my mind, but I thought, because I had seen the movie. I watched the movie. I thought, it's a good movie, everything like that. But Vancouver, in summer, in beautiful, So, and I was lucky, my hair was longer at the time. And the best time to audition for a role is right after you finish the big movie, because they don't know what it's going to be. And they knew that my agent had told them, and the casting agent knew I had just finished this Antonio Banderas and Anthony Hopkins, Catherine Zeta-Jones. And so they want a twofer. In other words, they hire you as a guest star, but they're getting, because it won't air for a while, they're going to get the benefit of saying, that was the guy that was in the Mask of Zorro. In addition to whether, I'm not saying it's the only thing, you have to do good work.
Right.
So it was that. So then I get up there, and to your point, who is this guy? Who is this guy? He's 137 years old. 133 to start, excuse me. 133. And who is he? I mean, what is it? Yes. Is it Bushido? Is it like the samurai code? There's something like a Roman warrior about him, or Sparta. There's something, and wait a minute, I'm getting into my wardrobe now, and they're using mail. And so you leave and you get a lot of help. Christine, who was the designer, and sometimes the actor, you do the auditions, you're trying to figure out what the hell is it, literally, because you haven't done it yet. And she helped me make the jump into it. And I thought, okay, so it's a Roman Stoic samurai medieval knight, and then, okay, what does he care about? What is his organ? Oh, his organ is his heart. He's open. He leads with his honor and his courage and those things. His quest for. Now I got a problem because my whole reason for being in the script is my attachment to one person. I know nothing of SG-1. I only know of teal'c. So I have to find out who's playing teal'c. And getting back to our thing, you have to be able to act with a chair. Well, first thing I asked when I got it said, who is playing teal'c? And they said, oh, that's the guy over there. And I went over and introduced myself to Chris. He looked at me. I looked at him, and I knew it was going to be perfect. I knew it was going to be perfect. But, and this is the last thing I'll say, television acting, you tend to take it back. Well, the guy who directed my first episode, and I believe directed the 2-hour movie, his name was Mario Hazzapardi. He was a Maltese guy, a big bear of a guy, just a big, and he'd go, Tony, bigger, make him bigger, make him let me tell you, it's too much, make him bigger. And I thought, okay, Mario, okay. And so he allowed me the scope for the size of him and again, trying to get out of my head. So and it's almost, imagine like you're thinking with this part of your body and you're not thinking with this part of your body. And it was so wonderful because the first scene I have, of course, is I have an altercation with a Neo, and it couldn't have been better, with Richard. And I think it's because of that, the chemistry between the two of us, and there was a great story, because at that time, there was a separation. I had no respect, out of my concern for teal'c. I have no respect for these. Who are these people?
Right.
They're not warriors. Look at the way. So there were so many things that helped. It was the summer. You're jumping through fire. There was a scene where jumping through fire. A great stunt man. I need to mention him, Bam Bam. And you develop it. It's getting back to the theater. The theater, you can create the edifice of a structure through rehearsal. It's not to say it doesn't change, but you have something to stand on. In film and television, you're rehearsing alone and you come on and you have to be open, because you have to be able to change your take on things by what you're getting from the other actor.
Yeah.
So that you're alive. So you're building in progress, if you will. You're building while moving. You're creating. And so to answer your question, I didn't know what Braytak would be like when I first did the first episode. He was created over the course of the episodes. And he eventually ended up no longer a warrior, but
a wise counsel.
A wise consul, right?
Mm-hmm.
An ambassador for peace, and so these things, but the chemistry is so important, if I hadn't had Chris,
it's really an ensemble. It's where all the moving pieces of the show came together and the stars aligned, and the timing was right, and the culture was right, and everything just came perfectly together. And I honestly was just blown away by your performance. And Tony, before I let you go and I ask my final question, I want to thank you so much for dedicating your time. I had a blast talking to you. I hope as many people as possible get to see it. I'm an honest and true fan of yours.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. And my last question to you is, which I worked really hard to draft to me, because that show means the world to me. SG-1, aside from being a great science fiction, it's a story of generations. It's Master Braddock to his son teal'c. It's teal'c to his son Riak. It's Jack O'Neill and his commanding officer, the General Hammond, right? And the question that I wanted to ask you was this very deep and layered character who evolves over so many episodes. You do 26 episodes on the show. Talk about some of the life lessons that you as the character teach to teal'c that help him become a better father to his son.
I think primarily It's to listen. It's to lead by example. I think he recognizes a lot of the rashness of teal'c because it was in himself. My favorite episode is called Threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And in Threshold, it's where I finally reveal myself. I don't know. I've been looking, if you can imagine the whole show, I'm training all of these young men. Who is going to be the one that I could share my secret with? That this is not true. And that we need to work actively against this. This is not true. I mean, it's the most important thing. And I find one. But there's a great scene in the snow where I tell him what it is. And this is the other thing, it's great. When will I know he's ready? One sense, I'm asking for obedience and deference. On the other sense, I'm trying to provoke him because I want him to grow. And that's what that scene about. So it's that teaching, provoking and giving, taking and giving, putting restraints. They say, writers, actors, everything, they say the most frightening thing for an actor is to have no limits, to have no constraints. But within constraints, great art can be made. Michelangelo only had this piece of marble to create that statue with. So it's all of those things. But and again, it's leading from your heart and your honor in that world, because that is not just my way. That is, I always think that Braytak has watched the transformation of the Jaffa code becoming part of the Baal and Apophis sort of fascist code. Yeah. And that's not what it's about. And it's trying to pull it back to that. So I don't know if that's too general.
It makes total sense, because I felt with my gut that it was such a pivotal moment for this extremely well-developed Jaffa people culture, where now it's the rite of passage. Now father passes on his skill to the son, and his son is stepping from the shadow of his father to become his own man. And boy, I'm telling you again, guys, I'm not over-exaggerating this. The performance you give in that show, I was like, oh my God, it is so amazing.
Thank you so much.
Tony, once again, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. I wish you many more years of beautiful, productive work and amazing roles and happy characters that we all could enjoy. Thank you so much.
I hope so. And I hope in a decade we have some more stuff to talk about. So we can hook up in a decade. Anyway, you be well. Thank you.
Guys, thank you so much for watching this podcast. Please leave your likes, comments, all your commentaries and questions, and I'll answer them. Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you, guys. We'll see you all later.